Well, hey, everybody. Thank you for joining us online today. As we're navigating this season together, I want to keep you updated on the latest information on our regathering plan and all that we're doing here at the Crossing. And so the best way for you to stay up to date is through my weekly church-wide email. If you don't get that, then you can sign up at the front page of our website, thecrossinglv.com, and just click on this link right here. It goes out every Friday morning. Well, there's something that is called the Cobra Effect. I don't know if you've ever heard that term or not, but it originated in India back when the British government was controlling India. There was so many cobras in the capital city of Delhi that the government started paying money for every dead cobra that was turned in. The plan was actually very successful in controlling the cobra population until some resourceful people came up with an idea. They began breeding cobras themselves and then selling them back to the government for income. Well, when the authorities found out about this, they canceled the program and the breeders released the snakes into the wild and the cobra population exploded. It ended up being worse than it ever was before. Well, today, we're going to look at a story that instead of calling it the Cobra Effect, you just might call it the sin effect. What seemed like such a great idea to one guy ended up wreaking havoc on him and everyone connected to him, because that's what sin does. Well, we're in this series that we've been calling Strong and Courageous. It's based on the Old Testament book of Joshua. After escaping from Egypt, the children of Israel wander in the desert for 40 years. Moses dies, and Joshua is the one who will lead them into the promised land. But whenever you go into new territory, it can bring some new challenges. That's where we are as a nation, and that's where we are as a church. We've never navigated the challenges that we're in right now. But there's some powerful lessons that we can learn in times like this. Well, last week we looked at the account after the children of Israel entered the promised land. And the first thing they did is they go and they defeat Jericho. Jericho was this fortified city with huge walls. And they march around the walls of Jericho for 6 days. And on the seventh day, they march around 7 times. And God brings down the walls and they conquer Jericho. God made it easy on them. He was trying to teach them, depend on me. Put your trust in me. Before they attacked this city, God had made it very clear to them. When you attack Jericho, don't take anything for yourselves. Don't take their crops, animals, gold, silver, nothing. Destroy the city and leave all the stuff behind. Well, one of the guys in Israel, he was a guy by the name of Achan. And his name actually means troubler. I don't know if that was his reputation. Here comes trouble. But that's what he brings on the nation of Israel. After the walls of Jericho came down, he comes across some silver and gold and an expensive robe. He steals them and hides them under the corner of his tent, and he thinks that his secret is safe with himself. And we're going to pick up the story right here in Joshua chapter 7. It says, now Joshua sent men from Jericho to Ai, and he told them, go up and spy out the region. So the men went up and spied out Ai. Well, let me show you on a map where this is. That the children of Israel, they actually crossed the Jordan River right here. That this is where they were wandering in the desert. They crossed the Jordan River into the promised land. And that first night, they stayed here in the city of Gilgal. They go from Gilgal, and it was just about a mile's walk here. But then the first place they go is Jericho. And they go and they march around the walls of Jericho. They defeated this city, and the next stop is Ai. And it's just this little city. It's this kind of city that only has one stoplight, and Joshua thinks, well, this is going to be easy. So he sends some spies to go check it out. The distance from Jericho to Ai was only a few miles, but it was 3,300 foot in elevation. So the spies sneak up and they look over the mountain onto Ai. And then it says this, it says, when they returned to Joshua, they said, not all the army will have to go up against Ai. Send 2,000 or 3,000 men to take it, and do not weary the whole army, for only a few people live there. Joshua, it's just this little podunk town. So just send a few thousand soldiers, just 2,000 or 3,000. There's no reason to wear out the whole army. This is going to be a piece of cake. So Joshua, he takes their advice. And it says, so about 3,000 went up. But they were routed by the men of Ai, who killed about 36 of them. They chased the Israelites from the city gate as far as the stone quarries and struck them down on the slopes. Israel gets crushed, and they lost 36 people. And it is a direct result of Achan's sin. See, here's what we often think. We often think, well, this is my life. I can do whatever I want. I can live however I want. But your sin, it doesn't just affect you. It affects everyone around you. Here's what happens with sin. It starts with a thought. And then it goes from this thought to your imagination that you begin to think about it. And then we justify. It goes to justification, and we begin to justify while it would be okay. It moves to a choice, and then that leads to sin. Achan is walking through Jericho after the walls have come down, and he comes across this silver and gold and an expensive robe. And he has this thought. This thought is, well, what a waste to leave this behind. And it begins to capture his imagination. He can't stop thinking about it. He can picture himself in this expensive robe. He thinks he's going to look good. And so he justifies why it's okay to take it. Here's why he takes his treasure. He thinks, after I've been wandering in the desert with nothing, it's time for me to have some of the blessing. He makes a choice. He looks around, and nobody sees him. And he falls into sin as he decides to steal it. It's the process of sin. It starts with a thought. Well, he understands me better than my husband does. She gets me. And then it moves to the imagination. A relationship with them would be so satisfying. It would be so much better than what I have now. And then you start to justify, I deserve to be happy. I never really loved them anyway. Then you make a choice. Sure, let's go get drinks after work. And that leads to sin. What Achan didn't realize is God's bigger blessing was right around the corner. God would say of the cities that they conquered from here on out, take whatever you want. It's all yours. But Achan tried to shortcut God's blessing because he wanted it now. Well, when they were defeated by Ai and they lost 36 people, here's what it says. It says, at this, the hearts of the people melted in fear and became like water. Everything had been going great. God felt so close as they crossed the Jordan River on dry ground. They took up stones to remember God's faithfulness. They walk around the walls of Jericho, and every day they walk, God increases their faith. And now they're thinking, where's God? But it's not just them. It's Joshua as well. It says, then Joshua tore his clothes and fell face down to the ground before the ark of the Lord, remaining there till evening. The elders of Israel did the same and sprinkled dust on their heads. Have you ever been so broken that this is the only thing that you could do? Joshua falls on his face and he spends the entire day praying. Joshua says, alas, sovereign Lord, why did you ever bring these people across the Jordan to deliver us into the hands of the Amorites to destroy us? God, why would you do that? If only we had been content to stay on the other side of the Jordan. If you've been a Christian for very long, you've prayed this kind of prayer right here. God, I don't get it. Where were you? Why would you allow this to happen? Well, maybe it's our fault because we wanted a better life. We thought we were going where you wanted us to go. He goes on. He says, pardon your servant, Lord. What can I say? Now that Israel has been routed by its enemies, the Canaanites and the other people of the country will hear about this, and they will surround us and wipe out our name from the earth. What then will you do for your own great name? God, when the word gets out, all of our enemies, they're going to come after us. Why would you bring us to the point to wipe us out? God, I don't get it. But God, you probably hadn't thought about this. But this isn't just an embarrassment for us. God, this is going to be an embarrassment for you. Don't you feel embarrassed? Well, God finally responds to Joshua. The Lord said to Joshua, stand up. What are you doing down on your face? Joshua, what are you doing? This isn't the time to pray. Stand up. What are you doing on your face? Well, God, I'm praying. See, this is so confusing for us because it makes sense to pray when your life is crashing down around you. But God says to Joshua, this isn't time to pray. This is the time to act. This is the time to do something. Joshua, stand up. God goes on and he says, Israel has sinned. They have violated my covenant, which I commanded them to keep. They have taken some of the devoted things. They have stolen. They have lied. They have put them with their own possessions. Israel has sinned. Now time out here, because we know the rest of the story. Israel didn't sin. It was one guy who sinned. If you're grading on the curve, everyone gets an A. They didn't steal. They didn't lie. They didn't take the devoted things. Achan did all of that. But here's the thing. Your sin, it doesn't just affect you. You can't say, this is my life. I can live it however I want. Because what you do, it impacts everyone in your life. I can't tell you how many kids I've talked to over the years who've had a parent who cheated on their spouse, and every time those kids feel like their mom or dad cheated on them. We look at the story right here, and we can argue all day long, well, that's not fair. They shouldn't pay the price. It's not fair, but it's true. If you're hanging out with someone addicted to prescription drugs or alcohol, it doesn't matter how good you are. It's going to affect you as well. Achan's sin didn't just affect him. It didn't just affect the 36 men who lost their lives. Those 36 men, they were sons and husbands. They were brothers. They had sons and daughters. They had people who depended on them. In the book of Hosea, Hosea tells us that when you sow the wind, you will reap the whirlwind. If you're around someone who sows the wind, you're going to get hurt by the whirlwind that swarms around them. But the opposite is true as well. When you live in obedience to God, it opens up your life to blessing. And that blessing, it will spill over onto those who are closest to you. It was a few months ago. Darla's mom sold her house and she gave us some of the money. And we were able to take some of that money and give it to our kids. So when we were blessed, we were able to bless others. I have to tell you, that was way more fun for us than being blessed. It was being able to share that blessing with those who are around us. Well, our story goes on. It says, this is why the Israelites cannot stand against their enemies. This is God speaking. They turn their backs and run because they have been made liable to destruction. I will not be with you anymore unless you destroy whatever among you is devoted to destruction. Go, consecrate the people. Tell them to consecrate yourselves. Now, this right here, it means to dedicate yourself. It means to set yourself apart. Tell them, consecrate yourselves in preparation for tomorrow. For this is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says. There are devoted things among you, Israel. You cannot stand against your enemies until you remove them. God says, first things first. If you want to defeat your enemies, you have to take care of the sin in the camp. You have to take care of the sin first. So they do exactly that. They question every family until they find the gold and silver that was taken. They take that, they put it back in Jericho, and they burn it. And they put Achan and his entire family to death. Which you may be thinking, what? Why kill him? Why kill his family as well? Well, that's why I can't believe in God. Here's what God was teaching his people. Sin brings death. Sin brings death. Sin brings death. It was all in preparation for the coming of Jesus. Sin brings death, and Jesus took your death upon himself. What sin is hidden in your tent today? So you can try to hide it like Achan. You can pretend it's not there. But unresolved and unconfessed sin in your life becomes a barrier to God's work in your life. So here's the question for you. Where is God calling you to get up and do something? For the children of Israel, after they got their tails kicked, Joshua begins to pray, God, why would you let this happen? Don't you love us anymore? And God says, why are you praying? Stand up. This isn't the time to pray. This is the time to take action. Here's perhaps the deeper question. Are you hiding behind your prayers? Are you praying when you need to stand up and do something? Have you been praying about the same thing over and over, and God is nudging you? It's time to stand up and act. Here's a couple things that are indicators that it's time for you to do something. Here's this first one. If God has already addressed it in His Word, you don't need to pray about it. As obvious as this sounds, you would be surprised at the number of times someone has come up to me and said, well, I'm praying about such and such, and I feel like God is silent. And I just say, actually, God has been very clear about that. You don't have to pray about being honest ever. Just go ahead and be honest. You don't have to pray about being faithful to your husband or wife. It's covered. You don't have to pray about whether to move in with your boyfriend before you get married. Covered. You don't have to pray about whether to cheat at school or to cheat on your taxes. Covered. There are a bunch of things that you don't need to pray about. If God's already addressed it in His Word, then it's time for you to get off of your knees and be obedient. If God has covered it in His Word, just obey His Word. Here's the second thing. If you're trying to pray your way out of something you've behaved your way into, then it's time to stand up and do something. Go ahead and pray along with taking action. If you're single and you've been praying about finding a healthy relationship until you decide to end an unhealthy relationship, until you decide to put God first in your relationships, it's time to do something. If you're a parent and maybe you're praying for your kids, continue those prayers. But it also may mean that your kids don't need another friend. They need a parent who will put boundaries around them. Where is God calling you to get up and do something? As I'm talking about this, maybe there's something that's coming to your mind. And God is whispering, it is time to do something. It is time to do something. Here's what the Hebrew writer writes in Hebrews chapter 4. It says, nothing in all creation is hidden from God's sight. Everything is uncovered and laid bare before the eyes of Him whom we must give an account. I want to give you something tangible to do. And my prayer for you is that it will be this line in the sand for you. It'll be something that brings healing to you. Maybe there's a sin that you've buried and it needs to come to light and no one knows about it, but it's time for you to confess it and deal with it. We have this wall behind the auditorium, and it's going to be up all week long. It was the wall that we built last week. Here's what I invite you to do, is for you to come by our campus anytime this week. There'll be Sharpies for you to write a prayer on the wall or to make a confession. It's just between you and God. You don't have to sign it. It's just between you and God. Maybe it's a commitment to act, to do something. And then after you write on the wall, I want you to take a piece of the wall. It's broken down there around the wall. Just take a piece of it. Put this somewhere that reminds you to pray. That it reminds you of the commitment that you've made to God. Maybe it's a commitment to finally surrender your life to Jesus. Maybe for some of you, it's going and writing on that wall and finally deciding, I need to be baptized. I need this brand new start in Jesus. Let me close by reading how this story ends. It says, "Then the Lord said to Joshua, 'Do not be afraid. Do not be discouraged,'" which is what God would say to him time and time again. "Take the whole army with you and go up and attack Ai, for I have delivered into your hands the king of Ai, his people, his city, and his land." Did you catch that? He says, I have delivered. Past tense. Not I'm going to deliver. It is already done. And that is what God can do for you as well. God can take whatever situation you find yourself in, and God says, I've already delivered you. I have already delivered you. It's just time for you to submit yourself to God. Well, I just want to close in prayer. I just want to take this opportunity to pray with you, because maybe there's something that has come up in your heart as I've been teaching this message. There's something that's beginning to come to your mind, and God's saying, okay, it's time. You've prayed about this for a long time. Now it's time for you to take action. Now it's time for you to do something. And I want you to begin to pray about that. Say, okay, God, I'm going to give this to you, but I'm making a commitment to not just pray about it. I'm making a commitment to act upon it. So let me just pray for you as you are making these commitments in your life right now. God, we thank you for this incredible story. God, the truth is that sometimes the things that happen in our life, it's because there is sin in the camp. It's because there is this hidden sin that has gone unconfessed and unrepentant, and it's starting to bubble its way to the surface. God, I pray that you would give us the courage to identify these things in our life. God, give us the courage to finally shine a light on them and begin to take care of them. God, it's not that you're telling us not to pray. It's you're saying sometimes it's time to act. And so, God, would you help us to have the courage to act in these areas in our life? God, maybe there's somebody who is watching this right now who is ready to finally surrender their life to Jesus. They're ready to finally be obedient, to be baptized. And maybe you've been nudging them for a long time, but you're just saying, okay, it's time. It's time for you to step across the line of faith. So God, I just pray that you would do your work in us. Make us like Jesus. And we pray this in the name of Jesus. Amen.